On January 3rd, the U.S. military launched a surprise raid and captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, and the aftermath of this event is still unfolding. A blogger shared that it seems Chinese temples shouldn't be visited casually, as it can lead to major problems. Former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad visited China in 2023 and went to the Lingyin Temple in Hangzhou. By the end of 2024, he was overthrown by the opposition. Venezuelan President Maduro, who had visited China on September 13, 2023, also climbed Mount Tai and visited temples. On January 3, 2026, he was arrested. From September 8 to 14, 2024, Maduro visited China for the fifth time as president. His trip included Shenzhen, Shanghai, Shandong, and Beijing. Chinese state media showed footage of him visiting Mount Tai on September 13th, when he greeted tourists in Chinese, saying hello and how are you, while shaking hands and waving. At a press conference before leaving China, Maduro stated, "The friendship between Venezuela and China is as strong as Mount Tai." However, Maduro ended up being another example of a leader falling after aligning with the Chinese Communist Party. Now, two more targets are emerging for U.S. action. On the evening of January 5th, President Trump returned to Washington, D.C. aboard Air Force One. On the plane, Trump predicted that the Cuban Communist government would soon collapse. Maduro's fall and the collapse of Venezuela's ability to fund its regional allies are directly related. Trump said, "Cuba is a failing nation right now, a very badly failing nation. I don't think we need any action." He added, "Cuba now has no income. They get all of their income from the Venezuelan oil. They're not getting any of it, and Cuba literally is ready to fall, and you have a lot of great Cuban Americans that are going to be very happy about this." Secretary of State Marco Rubio also reiterated his warning about Cuba on January 5th during an interview with NBC. He said, "I think they're in big trouble." According to earlier reports from the Wall Street Journal, the communist nation of Cuba is struggling with food shortages, disease outbreaks, and frequent power outages. Since 2020, a quarter of its population has fled. The Social Rights Observatory, a think tank, reported that a poll conducted last summer revealed that nearly 90% of Cuba's population lives in extreme poverty. Cuba is now experiencing the worst economic crisis since 1959, more severe and prolonged than the period following the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. Ted Henkin, a professor at Baruch College in New York, regularly visits Cuba. He said, "The situation in Cuba is really dire. It's hopeless." For years, Venezuela has supported the Cuban regime by providing cheap oil. Venezuela's oil accounts for about 40% of Cuba's oil import needs. The oil is crucial for power plants, transportation, and small businesses. Cubans know that if Venezuela's oil shipments stop or drastically decrease, it will be devastating for them. Ricardo Torres Perez, a Cuban economist at American University in Washington, D.C., stated that Cuba's cumulative inflation rate between 2018 to November 2025 is close to 450%. The Cuban peso has devalued sharply, with the black market exchange rate being about $1 to 450 pesos. Compared to around 1 to 30 in 2020. Perez said, "You could say things can't get worse, but we know it's going to get worse." Since 1999, Venezuela has played a crucial role in Cuba's economy. Former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez emphasized the close relationship between the two countries. Cuba sent sport coaches, doctors, and counterintelligence agents to Venezuela. These Cuban agents helped eliminate so-called traitors who might have overthrown Chavez. In return, Venezuela sent 100,000 barrels of oil per day to Cuba. In the last decade, under Maduro's leadership, Venezuela's oil production has sharply declined, leading to economic collapse. Despite cutting oil supplies to Cuba, former Venezuelan and U.S. officials say Cuban intelligence agents remain active in Venezuela, helping Maduro's regime suppress uprisings, detect coup plans, and eliminate disloyal officers and officials to ensure Maduro stays in power. U.S. officials say that Cuban security forces have played a central role in maintaining Maduro's power. On January 5th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Cuban agents effectively control Venezuela's internal intelligence and security operations. They personally protect Maduro and monitor loyalty within his government. On January 3rd, the U.S. military launched a joint operation with air, land, and sea forces to assault the Venezuelan capital, Caracas, capturing Maduro and his wife. U.S. President Donald Trump said in an interview with the New York Post on January 3rd. Many Cubans who protected Maduro's lost their lives. Trump remarked, "Cuba was always very reliant on Venezuela. That is where they got their money, and they protected Venezuela. But that didn't work out too well in this case. On January 5th, the Cuban government admitted that 32 Cuban soldiers and police officers were killed during the military operation. This was the first time Cuba officially reported the death toll. Cuban state media said that these soldiers and police were deployed at the request of the Venezuelan government and announced a 2-day national mourning period. On January 4th, Venezuela's defense minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez confirmed that the assault killed most of Maduro's security team. Cuba remains one of the last few communist allies of the Chinese Communist Party. On the afternoon of May 9, 2025, Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping met with Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermudez during his visit to Moscow. Xi Jinping claimed that China is willing to further strengthen the ironclad friendship with Cuba. Díaz-Canel stated that Cuba and China are close friends and brothers. When Xi Jinping met with Maduro in Moscow in May 2025, he also described the relationship between the two countries as an ironclad friendship from a strategic and long-term perspective. A news video shows that Cuban President and Communist Party First Secretary Miguel Díaz-Canel is inciting Cubans to fight for Venezuela. A netizen joked, saying another leader is stepping up to make threats. "Come and arrest me." There's another Latin American leader who isn't afraid of death, Colombian President Gustavo Petro. Gustavo Petro became president of Colombia on August 7, 2022. He's a left-wing leader with pro-CCP views. On May 14, 2025, Colombia officially joined China's Belt and Road Initiative, and that day Xi Jinping met with Petro in Beijing. After Maduro's capture, Petro posted on X, expressing concern over reports of explosions and unusual aerial activity in neighboring Venezuela, and worrying about the rising risks of regional tensions. On January 5th, Trump criticized Colombia, accusing the country's left-wing leaders of fueling drug smuggling into the U.S. Trump said, "Colombia is very sick too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States, and he's not going to be doing it very long." Trump also accused President Petro of running a cocaine factory and reiterated that Petro should be careful. On January 4th, Trump warned that if Colombia fails to control its drug problem, the U.S. might take military action. On October 2025, the Trump administration imposed sanctions on Petro, his wife, son, and a government official, accusing them of being involved in global drug trafficking. After the U.S. operation to capture Maduro, Petro said he had ordered troops to be deployed along the Venezuelan border. Petro directly challenged the Trump administration at home, saying, "If you want to jail me, try and see if you can. If you want to put me in the orange jumpsuit, go ahead, but this nation will not kneel before you." Interestingly, Maduro had previously made similar remarks. In an August 2025 speech, Maduro openly provoked Trump, saying, "Come get me. I will wait for you here in Miraflores. Don't be late, coward." On January 4, 2026, the official White House X account responded to Maduro's provocation with a direct retaliation. The video began with clips of Maduro's past provocations, followed by night vision footage of the U.S. military operation, explosions, the capture scene, and images of Trump's team. The video ended with the message, "Nicolás Maduro had his chance, until he didn't." U.S. officials also signaled that further military actions against certain authoritarian regimes could be in the cards. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said, "America can project our will anywhere, anytime. The coordination, the stealth, the lethality, the precision, the very long arm of American justice, all on full display in the middle of the night." General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, explained that Operation Absolute Resolve was executed with precision and secrecy during the darkest hours of January 2nd. He highlighted that the operation was the result of months of planning and operation, adding that only the U.S. military had the capability to carry out such a mission. He also stated that the U.S. is always prepared for similar operations in the future. Trump described the January 3rd raid as part of a broader effort to reaffirm U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere, invoking the Monroe Doctrine. Earlier, on December 4, 2025, the Trump administration issued its national security strategy, reaffirming and executing the Monroe Doctrine to restore U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. The Venezuela shift was widely seen as part of this effort. The Monroe Doctrine, a core principle of U.S. foreign policy, was introduced by the 5th U.S. President, James Monroe. In his 1823 State of the Union address, he emphasized America for the Americans. During the Cold War, this doctrine was used to oppose communism, viewing the Soviet Union or left-wing regimes as foreign threats. However, in 2013, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry declared the end of the Monroe Doctrine era, until it was revived during Trump's second term. Taiwan expert Su Zhiyin stated, said that the Trump administration has disrupted Beijing's strategic layout in Central and South America. Venezuela's upheaval is one part of the bigger picture, including the U.S. expanding its influence in the Panama Canal and the pro-U.S., pro-Taiwan government in Honduras. This marks a structural shift. U.S.-based commentator Tang Jingyuan described the U.S. military operation as earth-shattering. Tang said, "The Trump administration prioritizes U.S. national security, especially geopolitical security. His new Monroe Doctrine merges domestic law enforcement and military action on the international stage." Tang further said, "The international community has always kept human rights and sovereignty separate, especially for tyrannies like Maduro's criminal regime. No other country could intervene, calling it internal affairs. But President Trump broke the rules and reshaped the international order. Now, if a leader of an illegal state commits major crimes, the U.S., as the international police, has the responsibility to bring them to justice." Taiwan expert Shen Mingshi noted that the Venezuela crisis would have a domino effect. First, it serves as a strong warning to other far-left or authoritarian-leaning regimes in South America. Currently, some South American countries are shifting toward the right. After Maduro's capture, the interim leader, Delcy Rodriguez, released a signal of de-escalation, calling for both countries to establish a balanced and mutually respectful relationship, and inviting Washington to work together on a cooperative agenda. This statement marked a shift from her previous criticism of the U.S., which she had called a violation of international law. The U.S. military launched a lightning-fast operation against Venezuela, capturing President Maduro in a move that shocked the world and caused significant reverberations in China. On January 4th, Chinese hawkish expert Li Yi, known for advocating military unification with Taiwan, discussed the incident on his YouTube channel. He angrily said, "Some people are still saying that cross-ocean operations are difficult. The mainland is only 180 kilometers from Taiwan. Did you hear that? Florida is the closest point to Venezuela, 1,800 kilometers away, and the capital Caracas is 3,300 kilometers from Washington, D.C., and they captured him alive." At this point, Li Yi was so furious that he slapped himself, saying, "I feel like I'm not even human." He was visibly agitated, slamming the table and even choking up while speaking. This clip was shared on X, and netizens commented, "It's like mourning. He started crying. Don't worry, there'll be more to cry about later." Additionally, netizens dug up a past statement from Chinese military expert Li Li, who had said that the U.S. would not act recklessly. Netizens mocked her, saying, "Whoever she praises, they're doomed." Li Li is a professor at the National Defense University of the People's Liberation Army. She had previously claimed on a show that Venezuela's military strength was formidable, stating that the U.S. was hesitant to take action against Maduro because Venezuela was not like Syria, nor was it comparable to Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein. She argued that the U.S. hesitated due to concerns about Venezuela's Big Brother support. Another Chinese military commentator, Du Wenlong, also claimed, "The U.S. won't send ground troops because they fear getting stuck in the quagmire of a people's war in Venezuela." Fudan University professor Shen Yi repeatedly argued that the U.S. wouldn't dare to take military action against Venezuela, and that Trump's closure of Venezuelan airspace was a bluff. After the U.S. military captured Maduro, public opinion criticized these Chinese experts, with many netizens expressing surprise at their failed predictions. One netizen sarcastically commented, "They're not experts, they're just artists." In response to President Trump's warning to Colombia and Cuba, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said on January 5th that China is willing to work with Latin American countries to deal with the ever-changing international situation. Unnamed diplomats in Beijing revealed that the U.S. took action to arrest Maduro shortly after his meeting with the Chinese envoy, putting China in a rather awkward position. This was because it directly interrupted a series of diplomatic efforts China had previously made. Commentator Yurshan believes that following Maduro's capture, China's claims of working with Latin American countries will become meaningless. Furthermore, with China's own internal struggles, if Xi Jinping dares to initiate war with Taiwan, he could become the next Maduro. In fact, just days before Maduro's capture, senior U.S. national security journalist Bill Gertz commented on social media that if a military attack on Taiwan were to occur, a drone strike similar to the one against Iran could be repeated in Beijing, targeting members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, including Xi Jinping. Taiwanese entrepreneur and prominent businessman Cao Xingcheng posted on Facebook, stating that Maduro's arrest shattered the CCP's calculations and should make its leaders feel fearful. He said, "We will begin to understand that no matter how they use nationalism to embolden themselves or state sovereignty to block criticism, their lies, violence, human rights abuses, authoritarian corruption and bullying of Taiwan and Japan will eventually face international sanctions. Cao added that if CCP leaders show more restraint, Taiwan will be safer, and those aligned with the CCP in Taiwan will also dare not be so arrogant.